Are you learning CSS Basics for Beginners and want CSS Float explained, float left, float right, and how to use CSS Float in real-world web development projects? If so, you're in the right place. Hi, Martin here from MDP Web Development. Today we'll be working on a project that we'll use as a reference project throughout the Web Development for Beginners playlist. Don't forget to check out the playlist from the start to get a better understanding of HTML and our reference project. It's updated each week with new videos. Be sure to stick around to the end to see how to get the project files on GitHub to use throughout this playlist. I'll link to important videos there also. There's a link in the description down below to the GitHub repository where all the source code is. Let's get started. So what is CSS Float? CSS Float property tells us if an element should float left, right, or not at all. And an important thing about CSS Float, it does not apply to elements with absolute positioning set, because the whole point of absolute positioning is everything else is ignored and the item is placed absolutely in one spot, and nothing can affect it. Content flows around the element when float is set. Like if you put something into a river, the water flows around wherever the object is placed. We can use float left, then all the content will wrap around it, or float right, or none at all, float none. That's just a default and no floating will take place. For this example, we're going to be working in the examples.css file, example.css.css, and the examples.html file. We're going to create the examples, and you can see on the right hand side there on the web browser, you have to click on the examples page. We'll be working in there. Here's an overview of what we're going to create. On the bottom, we can see the HTML. We're just going to have a paragraph element and then a div with a class set to float object inside it. Then at the top left, we can see the CSS, and we're going to create that class float object. And you can see we've set the background color of the floating div to aquamarine. The width set to fit content so that it fits nicely, and then float right. On the right, we can see in the browser the content is actually wrapped around the float object. Hi, before we move on, please don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe so you don't miss out on any upcoming videos. Thank you. So now we're going to open Visual Studio Code and our project and a browser window on the right to preview our project. It's going to go to our desktop and double click on Visual Studio Code. Then we're going to go to the Explorer view and open folder. And mine is on the desktop, so I'm going to go Desktop, Reference Project, select Folder. And here we can see we have our HTML file. If we open the browser view, we can see the reference project folder and the index.html file we created. Now to see the browser window on the right, if you have the live server extension installed, you'll see Go Live button down here on the bottom. And if you haven't, you just have to go out to your desktop, open the folder, and click on the index.html file. So once you've clicked on that file, we're just going to click this Go Live button here. And that'll start up a new browser server window for us. So a handy shortcut for Windows to put something on the left and right is to press the Windows key and then right or left arrow and release the Windows key. Then select the one you want on the left or right. So I'll close this panel. So another handy shortcut for Windows is the zoom key. If you press CTRL, then the plus to zoom in and negative to zoom out. So we can see here we have our Windows browser on the right. So the only difference if we had to open this manually on the desktop and click on the file is if we make changes on the left in our code editor, you would have to click refresh on the right to see it. So here we are, we have VS Code open on the left and we have our browser opened on the right. Now let's do the CSS Float example. So we're going to open CTRL and plus to zoom in a bit. We're going to open the examples HTML file and also the example CSS.css file. Now to make this a bit handier to work on, I'm going to drag the examples HTML file down to the bottom, and you can see then it'll stay on the bottom, and we can see the HTML and then CSS above that. So first, let's have a look here. So I've just put in some comments here on the left, CSS Float example, just to keep stuff looking nice. You can see here then I have a H2 with CSS Float example. You can see the H2 here. Then the HR for horizontal line underneath. Now let's have a look. So we're going to create a paragraph of content. We'll say text. So P for paragraph and hit enter. Let's just put in some text. This is a paragraph of text. Now I'm just going to copy and paste this a few times to give us a nice thick big paragraph of text. And click save. Now inside this paragraph at the start we'll put an item in and we'll set it to float and see what happens. So let's put in a div. A div is a common element we can use just to create stuff that we want to do custom development on. Let's go div and hit enter. Now we have a div. Now we don't have to put anything inside it, but let's just put a paragraph inside this div with test written in it. Now we can see now it's on top there on the right hand side. I'll just CTRL and plus to zoom in. We can see that our div is there. Let's give our div some color now and see if we can alter where it actually floats inside this paragraph. So we're going to go into our CSS examples, example css.css file. Now what class will we create here? We can call it anything we want. So in the div on the bottom that we put in there, let's put it as class equals float object. Now open our CSS file on the top. Let's create that class. Let's go dot float object. Let's set a background color. Let's just choose this nice blue color here. Now we can see the float object has been set with the background color blue. Now let's just make it the same size as the content. Width. If we type in fit content. Now we can see now that our test object is in a normal position. This is standard in the web. You'll see they're going inline top to bottom. So our test objective is there. Then the paragraph is underneath. Now let's set the float position and see what happens. We're going to go float. And if we say left and click save, we can see now, you might have to click save or refresh on your browser. We can see here now that the float element is actually floating left and the paragraph is wrapped around it. How cool is that? Now let's see what float right does. We can see now it's actually on the right and the paragraph is wrapped around it. You can do this in image galleries with text wrapping around images. Let's just see it on what float none does. And we're back to square one. We can see that float none is the default. There is no float. How cool is that? So to get the files used in this example, the HTML reference project, just go to the GitHub link that's down in the description of this video. You can have a look at it here. So a GitHub repository is just a location on the internet hosted by a company called Git that most developers like to share or store their code in, either for their own use or to share with other developers. The repository on GitHub is just a folder used to store code or files, etc. Let's have a look at each folder.
So when we're in the repository here, you can see the name of the repository there, actions along the top. You can see the main folder here, and there's a README file too. So if you want, you can just click onto the folders and see what's inside them and download the code from there. But to get all the code, you're going to go over here to the code button. We're going to click and download zip file. Once that's downloaded, go into your downloads folder. Then we need to extract it. So we're going to Windows, you're going to right click and extract all. Now let's just have a look at these files in VS Code. So we're going to go to our desktop. We're going to open up Visual Studio Code. And now we're going to open the folder that we just extracted. Open folder on the left. And we're going to go to Downloads. And here we are. And you can see here on the Explorer view on the left, there's the folder we can click to expand. And here's the reference project folder. And here's the HTML file, so we'll click on that, and there's the code. You can use this for reference or to rebuild your project if something goes wrong.
Hi, I hope you found this video helpful. If so, please like, share, comment and subscribe so you don't miss out on any upcoming videos in the Web Development for Beginners playlist. See you next time.